Hi, welcome to Scottish Summit 2021. Thank you so much for being part of this virtual event. I hope you're enjoying all the great content that's been coming to you from the summit. Hopefully next year we'll be doing this face-to-face. Thank you so much to our sponsors. Without sponsors, this event would not be possible, and we are very, very grateful. My name is Joy Apple. I'm a modern workplace strategist with the Pate Group. I'm also a recently awarded Microsoft MVP. I have been working with Microsoft products and technologies for over 12 years now. And I have to say, this is a very exciting time to be working with the platform. Things we just dreamed about being able to do years ago, they're right here and available for us to use. And it's a super exciting time. I also, when I'm not doing stuff for Pate Group, I lead the Joy of SharePoint webinar series. My Twitter handle is @JoyOfSharePoint. You can also find me under that name on Instagram for all kinds of Microsoft 365 collaboration goodness. All right, so let's talk about Teams in the architecture. Information architecture is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. And as you can tell from my social media name, Joy of SharePoint, I like SharePoint. I enjoy working with it. And I enjoy building out architecture. Here comes Teams, right? It's nothing new. It's been around for over 4 years now. And in the last year, we have seen the world embrace Teams because it has helped us work remotely together in ways we wouldn't have been able to before its release. But I think we get a little confused sometimes, or we feel that there's a bit of a roadblock in figuring out how to loop Teams into our information architecture. It definitely serves an important purpose, and I want to talk through that process today. So first off, this is my obligatory what the heck is Teams and why should I care slide. So Teams is a chat-based communication platform. Chat is usually where people get their first introduction to Teams. If it's not chat, it's going to be a meeting. I've got clients that the first time they've ever touched Teams is because I sent them a meeting invitation. So definitely a very powerful tool. But as we're going to kind of talk through in this first couple of slides, in some ways it's simplistic because the things we've got here on the slide, chat-based communication platform, being a collaboration hub for important and relevant files, and a meeting hub, there's that word again, we're probably going to say it a lot today, a meeting hub with built-in call and video capabilities. Those are really the only 3 things Teams does natively, all by itself. There's a lot more to Teams, but it's not doing that inside of the platform. It's utilizing the other areas of Microsoft 365 to get those functionalities in Teams, where it truly does become a hub for teamwork. So there are 2 basic types of teams. It's either a public team or a private team. There are organizational teams, but I would say it's fair to say that's a type of public team. A public team can be joined by anyone in the organization. Remember, when I'm saying public, I do mean within the organization, username and password. If I'm not a member of a public team, if I go to the area Teams where I can search for public teams, I can find it, click on it, and let myself in. A private team has much tighter security around it. Typically, we're going to see private teams for departments, business unit, project teams. So there's going to be defined security there, and only the people that our team owners add in have access to that team. Let's talk a little bit about the components of a team. Off the bat, we see some pretty obvious things. In fact, I have got a slide here to kind of zoom in on that. So we see the names of our teams, right? When we come into the teams, we see its channels. We see tabs. So posts, that's going to be our chat, right? Where we have our conversation inside of a team. On the files tab, that's where we put our files. We have our wiki, kind of like OneNote Lite. And then of course we have this plus sign. So we have the ability to add custom tabs like I've done here. So I had 4 more added in here in this demo I built out. So these are the things we see up front when we come into a team. We could say that this is the architecture of our team, right? We have our team name, which is kind of the container, the identifier, and then the channels, which are the structure and the organization of our team. What we don't see at first inside of a team is going to be that Microsoft 365 group. That is what provides the permissions and the security of the group. Microsoft 365 group basically is a security service. When I add members to that group, they get permissions to all the assets that are associated with that group. And fun fact, when you create a team in Teams, you get all kinds of stuff. You get your SharePoint site, you get a planner plan, you get a OneNote notebook, you get a group inbox and a calendar. You get all those things, and that Microsoft 365 group is provisioning the access to all those simultaneously. So as an admin, I'm not having to go add the 5, 20, or 30 people that need to have access to all of those resources. And now here's the fun fact. We all know, if we've been using Teams for very long at all, that I can be having a chat conversation, I can drag and drop a document into chat, and Teams puts that in that channel's files tab. Or I could be inside the files tab and I can bring over several documents to put inside that files tab. But what I'm really doing is dropping those inside of Teams where there's a handoff to SharePoint. When we start looking really close at the Teams files tab, we see that it's really talking to our old friend SharePoint and letting SharePoint manage that content, because Teams is not a document management tool. It's a collaboration tool. It's a productivity tool. It lets us get to all of the things that we use day in and day out really fast and really easy. But SharePoint is what is going to continue to be our document management tool. So anytime I share a file in Teams, it's going to a library. It's actually going into a folder in a library in SharePoint. Now, if I'm in group chat and we're passing files back and forth, one-on-one chat or a group chat, OneDrive is going to be the document management tool for that, which is basically baby SharePoint. So SharePoint's documents, Teams is collaboration and productivity. Let's take a step back and look at our architecture at about 10,000 feet. Modern SharePoint architecture equals flat SharePoint architecture. And I know you're feeling like I've done the old bait and switch at this point, because you're like, hey, I joined a Teams session and this lady's talking about SharePoint. I promise, it all works together in the information architecture. So one of the important things to take away from the modern recommendations that Microsoft has given us for SharePoint is that subsites are de-emphasized, and the goal is to have flat architecture, which means a site for every permission need. So if I'm in HR, I need a place where I can put company public content that everyone in the organization can consume. That's going to be a SharePoint communication site. But we all know human resources is typically going to break down into many functioning groups: benefits, wellness, just to name a few, compensation. Benefits may break down into short-term disability, insurance, all kinds of areas. Each one of those groups is probably going to need a separately or an independently secured location to store the files that no one outside of that group should have access to. That's going to be a SharePoint team site. And in our modern world, here it comes, it's going to be a SharePoint team site that's connected to a Microsoft team. Because in Teams, we can do that fast and furious document collaboration. We can talk, real-time chat. It's searchable, findable conversations with searchable, findable content. And if SharePoint's still managing those documents, we have our metadata, we have versioning, and we've got that tried and true security that we've grown accustomed to. But it's better, because if we're not building it out where we have HR up top and then a site and then a site and then a site and a site, and then breaking the permissions throughout all those various levels, you're going to have a much cleaner permission experience, which means a much easier experience, both for the users who aren't going to knock their heads into broken permissions anymore, and for the administrators who don't have to untangle those knots anymore. So if we take those subsites, elevate them up, and make them top-level sites, we can now connect them to Teams. I can't take a subsite, groupify it, and then teamify it. I can't point a Microsoft 365 group at a subsite. It has to be a top-level site. That's why we're bringing those subsites up, making them top-level sites. Now, if you're coming from an on-prem SharePoint 2010, 2016, 2013, 2019, you start doing that migration over, those nested and child sites, like I just said, they get broken out. They get to be their own standalone sites. That does sound a little overwhelming. And I confess, when you're first going through it, you're like, wow, that is a lot of sites. It is, but it's worth it. I've got the it's worth it slide coming up next. But just be aware that it's a great time to start looking at those sub sites. Maybe the ones that have kind of been skipped over for a few years because we didn't need those ones in the middle. Get rid of them, right? Migrate those subsites over into standalone sites. Permissions will need to be rebuilt for any subsites that were inheriting permissions because the parent site permissions went with the parent. So we have to rebuild those. It's a great time to make sure we have our content and our permissions in line. It's a great time to just stop and evaluate and attest that everything is the way it needs to be. Here's the it's worth it slide, because it does sound overwhelming, but don't panic. The admin portal, once we adopt flat architecture, is going to give us a true representation of all the sites we're really working with. In the past, we went in and we went to our web application and we looked at our site collections. We never saw all the subsites. Now we don't have to worry about it. It's not hiding from you anymore. So no hidden subsites, fewer issues with permissions, unless you're really overusing nested folders. If you are, stop. But unless you really are, you're not going to have problems with URL links being too long and search breaking and backups breaking. And if you're still thinking, oh my gosh, joy, that's still a lot of sites, you get 2 million. I'm not saying that's a challenge to accept. I'm saying you get 2 million sites, you're probably not going to hit that limit, so it's probably going to be okay. All right. So here it is. You sat with me through the SharePoint piece, and I appreciate it. Let's talk about Teams, because Teams is for teamwork, and we all know that teamwork makes the dream work. So traditionally, fine, I'm sneaking this SharePoint back in. Traditionally, we had our department, our group, our project working in these kind of siloed ways. We might have wasn't a communication site, it was a publishing site where we publish stuff up for everybody. And then we had this team site, the working area, again, siloed and a little bit more secured. Since that's the way we were used to, publishing sites, team sites, more open permissions, and then the team sites being more secure, it absolutely makes sense that Microsoft Teams comes and associates itself with a team site. And we were already using those team sites for document management, for alerts, for workflow, our department meetings, usually on that big calendar web part that was always on our classic sites pages. News and announcements has already been there. So now we take all that traditional usage that if we've been using SharePoint for very long, we've got that stuff down pat. And we bring in Teams. And I know, I think a lot of last year in 2019, there was a lot of the hashtag better together, right? We take the SharePoint document management and we tie it to the Teams collaborative capabilities. And it truly is better together, because now we can work together in a way that really was created for collaboration. The messages inside of Teams are going to promote everyone in the team being part of that conversation. I will confess, if I get an email that's gone to about 5, 6, 7 people and a few people have responded, I'm not less likely to offer one more opinion unless everybody else is just really wrong, right? I see the thread, I consume it, probably not going to pile in, a 10th reply all. But inside of Teams, we're opening up the stage for everyone to have an opinion, to weigh in, to chat, to be part of the conversation. And if we're thinking about the way we've traditionally used email, when we had our stuff in SharePoint, we'd share a link, share content, and then have that long email conversation. How often did we always loop in everyone that needed to be a part of that conversation? If you're like me, you may tend to just do like the top 2-3 people that you work with the most and see what they have to say and then continue. But if we get rid of that mindset and we go forward the information to the team channel, everyone on the team sees it. We're looping in the experience and the expertise of everyone that we're working with on that project or inside of our department instead of just 2, 3, maybe 4 people, right? So now we're getting more holistic information from the entire team. Now that we're in teams where we've got kind of a little less formal process of communication, people are going to be much more likely to jump in and be part of the conversation. Did you know that you can do a Control F and search for keywords and specific stuff when you're inside of chat in Teams? So it's very, very searchable. And our content's going to be organized in those channels rather than hiding in emails. One of my email pet peeves is having to break down a really long email thread, clicking on that tiny little arrow to find where that attachment originally came in. But if I go to Teams and I'm putting my team content in the appropriate files tab, I don't have to think about it. I just go straight there. It's especially true if we're being very clear in the naming of our channels, right? So channels really are like the micro architecture for Teams. If I know I've got a document that's about deployment planning, then it really makes sense to put that in the deployment planning channel. So the next time I need to find deployment planning information, I'm not going to go to, the onboarding flow or the site design automation channel. I'm going to go to deployment planning. Everyone on the team has access to all of the standard channels. Not hidden from anybody. If you're on the team, you're in the team. So we all have access to the free flowing information. That said, private channels are not going to show up for people that aren't part of them, right? So I see I've got this Excelsior PM channel, private channel right here, but I don't see it when I go to SharePoint and I look at the list of folders that represent my channels, because a channel in Teams is a folder in SharePoint. But private channels, like this guy right here, they get their own SharePoint site. So they're not going to show up in the folder list because that's not where they exist. And I repeated it on the slide, so I'm going to say it again. Our private channels get their own separate SharePoint site. It's absolutely a big impact on our architecture. Now, why a site? Well, I have a lot of why questions around kind of how the decisions were made for what becomes what between Teams and SharePoint. Honestly, I kind of wish channels had become separate libraries in SharePoint so we could have unique metadata between them. But I'm a SharePoint person, so that's kind of where my brain goes. Regardless, should it have been a library? Is the channel awesome? Regardless of that, security best practices have always dictated that we secure the largest object possible inside of SharePoint. So if we follow that line of thinking, I want to create a private channel inside of my team, which means there is sensitive, highly confidential information in that channel. Otherwise, we wouldn't be hiding it from the rest of the team. So I want to put it somewhere where it's going to be respected and I don't have to worry about someone accidentally getting access to it. So if we're going to secure the largest SharePoint object possible, That's a site. It's not a folder. It's not a library. It's a site. And it's also worth noting at this point in time, sites that are tied to these private channels do not show up in the admin center. I don't know if it's on the roadmap or not for that to be remedied. Let's talk just a little bit about public channels and private channels real quick, or standard channels is what they're actually called. So if you're thinking about having a private channel inside of Teams, ask yourself a couple of questions. And I've been working on different versions of the slide for probably about 2 years now. That's where I've landed so far. So let's pretend we're holding in our hand the content that we're trying to decide if everyone on the team should have access to it or not. First thing, as you're thinking about this content, are all of the people that I want to have access to this stuff, whatever it may be, are they already in a team together? Maybe you're in a team, you're thinking about putting a private channel there. Is everybody that needs access to this stuff already in this team? And second question, is it a breach of security if everyone that's already in the team sees this content and is part of any conversation that surrounds it? All right, first question, are they all on the same team? Maybe the answer is yes. Yeah, it's human resources content and they're already in the HR team, and it's not a big deal if everyone in HR sees it. Then you don't need a private channel. Standard channel works just fine. And you might be thinking, yeah, but you know, the people that mostly work on benefits, they don't really care about this because it's about work from home policies. So, I mean, it's just one more channel that they're going to see. And if I made it a private channel, then it would be out of their way and it wouldn't clutter their view in Teams. That's not a security requirement. We can use the ability to show and hide channels and notification management to keep folks that don't care about a channel from being annoyed by that channel. So don't make it a private channel. There's no need to. All right, let's back it up. So I got our stuff. Is everybody that I know needs access to this content, are they already in this team? No. Most of them are, but I've got 3 or 4 other people I need to bring in from another team, so I'm just going to create a private channel and add those extra few people. Stop right there, because we can't do that. Your private channel members have to be part of that Office 365 group that's controlling permissions for your whole team. So if you only want 3 or 4 people from the existing team, that's fine. But if you need to bring in extra, you need a new team. Because if you bring those 3 or 4 extra in, they now are a member of your whole team. And they'll have access to all of the content and the conversations in all of your team channels. So we don't even have to go further and talk about security. We just need a new team. A cross-functional team. Awesome. Okay. The third option that I've come up with for this conversation, the answer comes up to sorta, right? So is everybody in the team? Yeah, and maybe a few more than we really want. Is it a breach of security if everyone that's already in this team sees this content? Yes. That's your sweet spot. That's when we absolutely go in and create a private channel. Everyone that I have here that I want to have access to this content, they're here, they're present, they're accounted for. But I've also got some other people that are already part of the team, and it's a breach of security. If they see it, that's a private channel. And it's a private channel that you've thought through and you're applying security best practices for, because it's going to go and it's going to create a separate site. And the reason why that's a big deal is because every time you're in SharePoint, you see you've gone to a new site, that's a whole new security boundary. Nothing inherits from it, so you don't have to worry about people accidentally getting access to it. All right, that's the fun stuff. Channels, files, chat, tabs. Tabs are magic inside of Microsoft Teams. Tabs lets us bring in access to the resources that we use day in and day out without ever having to leave Microsoft Teams. So perhaps there's a spreadsheet that you and your team go through weekly, monthly, even quarterly. And usually you play the who's got the spreadsheet game and you email it around and you wait for everybody to put their part in there. Okay, fine, it's finally my turn. You can just make that a tab at the top of your channel, whatever channel it makes sense. You don't have to hunt for it anymore. Through the magic of co-authoring, you all can work on that spreadsheet together. Perhaps it's a training video. Maybe you have an org-wide team and a training video has come out on proper usage of Microsoft Teams and meetings, and you've put that video in stream, tab to it. Maybe it's a third-party resource that you and your team use. You have to go to a website, you've got credentials that you use to log in. Well, instead of having to close Teams and open a browser and find your bookmark, you just make it a tab in one of the channels that you and your team use regularly. Right? So that's how Teams starts to become your hub for teamwork. It's still a flat, single pane almost in your intranet architecture. But on that flat piece of glass, you've got access to all the other things that previously you would have had to, well, officially it's called context switching. You've had to switch around what you were doing. I call it you had to play application hopscotch and jump from app to app to app. So let's break down the architecture and then let's go kind of look at it for real. Breaking down our information architecture. SharePoint. We have our communication sites, which are used to broadcast information from a small group of people out to a larger group of people. They're considered org-wide most of the time. If you're using Yammer for maybe your communities of learning or your more social areas in your organization, throw a web part on the page. The new Yammer web parts are fantastic. We have our team sites. That's where our teamwork happens with teams. But on the team site, department, team, collaborative effort, that's where we get our work done. Inside of SharePoint, we're using it for document management. We have our approvals, versioning, alerts, tied hand in hand to Microsoft Teams. That's where we go to have conversations, to discuss, to do our fast and furious document management. And then we use tabs to be able to get to other things as needed throughout any given workday. Just like we can use links on our SharePoint pages and in our navigation to go to other things, we use tabs in Teams to get to those other things. Do you already have a team site? It's just not connected to Teams. And you feel like, well, if I go to Teams, it's going to create another team site. And now I've got duplication out there and it's just going to be messy. It's not a problem at all. If you have a team site and you want to connect it to Teams, as long as you already have a Microsoft 365 group there, you can just go straight into Teams and use this create from option, and that'll wire it right up to your existing SharePoint team site. If you don't have a group associated with that site yet, there's a PowerShell script out there. Run it, groupify it, and then you teamify it. Okay, so here's a here's the architecture diagram of what this can start to look like as we build out. I'm going to zoom in here on operations. So in this example, ops didn't really need a communication site, so we just gave them a page on the corporate home site. And then there's a SharePoint Teams site that is one-on-one tied to Teams. Let's see how this looks if we step back and go to SharePoint and Teams. So I've brought Teams up. I'm using it in the web browser since I'm using a team meeting for this. Down here is where we have join or create a team. So if there were any teams out here that were public, like the fun team, I'm not a member of the fun team. If I wanted to be, I could just click that button to join. So that's how we find our public teams that we're not members of yet. I'm going to create a team. And here are my options from scratch are from an existing group or team. I can use another team that's out there as a template if it's already got the channels, perhaps for projects. If you wanted to crank out teams that basically are like templates, you can do that. Notice Teams does have templates available now. Scroll through here, but let's do it the hard way. I'm going to say from scratch. Private, people need permission to join. Public, anyone in your organization can join. Org-wide, everyone is automatically added and they can't leave unless an admin kicks them out. I call that the Hotel California of Teams. I believe you at this point in time can only have up to 5 org-wide teams inside of your tenant. All right, so I'm going to go private. That's the most common. So I'm going to give it a name. Create. Nice work. We created a team. So if I went right now and started trying to get into the SharePoint site that's associated with this, I may not be able to get in because at this moment, the whole Microsoft 365 tenant is working to create groups, to create the SharePoint page, to get the general channel up and going. You know, there's stuff happening. I can add members here. So if I already know who should be a part of this team, I can start typing them. If they're already part of a Microsoft 365 group, I could add that group here. I only have one fake user in my demo tenant at this point in time, so we'll add Bob user. The default is for Bob to be a member. I could make him an owner if I wanted to. All right, so off the bat, we just created a private team inside of my Joy SharePoint tenant. You see, I have general. The architecture for our team starts out small. It starts with the general channel. The next option is for us to create the channels, if we're not starting from a template, that we need to get to work. Let's talk about that for just a minute. The channels in Teams shine when we create them to match our work processes, because the goal here is collaboration. So this may be, and a lot of virtual events these days do get channels that match like the different rooms where conversations are being held or where presentations are being given, things like that. If we're talking about work, I used my HR example earlier, I might do a channel for every region from my HR team, the different regions where they are, the different things that our Teams does. But we can come in here, I'm on the wrong ellipsis. We just use this ellipsis to add a channel. I'm going to put one for slides. Here's where we get asked what kind of security we should have. Standard or private? Well, I would think everyone that's part of the summit we'd trust each other not to go jack up each other's slides, so we'll keep it on standard. I can choose as an owner to add this channel to everyone's list. They can always go unshow it later. Unshow, yes. So I add that channel. Slides. Notice I mentioned earlier you can show, you can hide. Here you can drag and drop your teams around pretty much whatever order you want them to be in. So if I don't care anything about slides and I never want to see slides again, I can just come hide it, right? I don't have to make channels private to keep them from cluttering up people's views, right? They can simply use the ability to hide it. When you hide it, it mutes the notifications, right? So then we start to quiet some of the noise that comes out of Teams. That's a freebie. That wasn't part of my original presentation. So I've got my slides channel. I've got my general channel. That's just where we talk about the Scottish Summit in general. But I use my channels to organize my content and my conversation, right? So things stay organized and clutter-free. So I'm going to come up to my Files tab here and show off this great, awesome, Open in SharePoint button. Before I do that, I'm going to do a couple other things. I'm going to get some demo stuff. So a few different ways we get stuff into Teams, aka SharePoint. I've got a file I'm just going to drag and drop right here. That's one way you can do it. But unless you go to the trouble of letting people know you just uploaded something, or they go looking, they won't. Also is my favorite way. I'll come here and let's do this one. Copy. So if I do the @mention everyone on the team. Budget upload. I'm just letting everybody know I uploaded it. It's the shortcut for the old way where we used to go put something in SharePoint or on a file share and then copy the path or the link to it and then go open an email and type the names of everybody and say, hey, I put this thing in this place. Here it is. Now I just drag and drop it. @mention either the whole team or the individual members. Send the message. Shoot out the notifications. And then magic, Teams puts it in files. And when Teams puts it in files, Teams is doing the handoff to SharePoint. So when I'm in a channel and I click open in SharePoint, I go into the folder that holds the files for the channel. And I use this breadcrumb, come right back in, right? So there's my general channel, there's my slides. If I were just to go crazy and start creating folders in SharePoint in this library, Teams will not know about them. It won't recognize them. It's not aware. It only knows about the channels that get created in Teams, not folders that get created in SharePoint. It's important to know that. If you already had a channel on your site and you did the merge and you added a team to an existing team site, just go create a channel with the exact same name, spelling, punctuation, spaces, everything, and they will sync up. But it's important to remember, this is our team site in our information architecture. There's a good chance that as part of the Scottish Summit, or let's be real, part of our company, our organization, maybe I'm on accounting or HR, I probably have content that's really not going through a lot of fast and furious editing, but I need to reference it. I need to look at it. I need to assess it. That's not going to really be good stuff to have in your team channels in your files tab. It's going to clutter it up. It's in the files tab because we're working on it, we're editing, and we're collaborating. But if you have perhaps new library, reference material, free sales content that we need to reference. We can go ahead and have that here. Just gonna drag and drop a couple of things. No, not that, not a video. Maybe it's a contract that's already been signed, or it's an invoice that's already been processed, right? No problem at all. What we do is we utilize our tabs. I'll use general since I'm already here. Let's use this plus sign. So this tabs are magic. They're magic. The top few rows are going to be the Microsoft specific stuff or custom apps that have been added into your environment. And then we've got a whole slew of third-party apps that are available. But I want a SharePoint library. So I'm going to use this guy right here. And it knows the sites that I have access to. Quite a few. Let's see. It's not recognizing this one yet. It's probably too new. So I'm going to use the link. I'm going to cheat. I mean, it's not cheating if it's built-in functionality, right? Oh, hang on. Almost the whole library. Back it up. Here we go. Go. Next. And now it's showing me all my options. So if I had 15 libraries in the site, I pick the one I want. I am going to post to the channel about the tab. I like to let people know I'm working. So if I'm doing something, I'm going to let them know about it. It doesn't know to rename. I don't need just a tab that says document library. That would not be super useful. All right, so now I'm leveraging my architecture inside of Teams in a very useful and a very meaningful way. So I'm showing people how to delete form responses. That's not going to go through edits. Probably is not going to go through a collaborative process, so I don't need it to be in my Files tab. That's where the stuff we work on goes. And then when it's done and it's ready to be published, either to a more static reference library on our team site or even out to a home page somewhere, right? We pull it out of Files and put it in a resting place, in a new home where it can stay and be reference content. And here, there's that library. Pretty nice, right? And it starts to, again, leverage the architecture that's here. Now, coming soon, we're going to have the SharePoint Home app inside of Teams, where our corporate home pages can be leveraged right inside of Microsoft Teams. If you were part of the announcements that came out last week, or maybe the week before, time flies when you're having fun. Microsoft Viva is going to be using Teams as the application, that hosts so much employee engagement content, right? It truly is our hub for teamwork inside of the organization. Once we step back, we can see that there is a place for Microsoft Teams inside of our information architecture. SharePoint provides sites for us to broadcast our company public information to our organization, and it has provided over the years sites for us to use for our team-centric document management and collaboration. But Teams is here to help us streamline and enhance the collaboration that takes place around the documentation that we work on with our teams, whether that's inside of a department or is cross-functional with projects throughout the organization. And remember, Teams isn't just a place to chat and to talk about the files that we put inside of our Files tabs. We can utilize Teams to truly become a hub for our teamwork. It's not just a buzz phrase. By utilizing tabs and the apps that we can add to the left rail through connectors in Teams, we can bring into one platform approvals using Power Automate and Power Apps, tasks from Planner and To Do, third-party websites, tools, other applications. It becomes, again, a single pane of glass in terms of where we have to go. But in many ways, it's three-dimensional as we come to Teams to connect ourselves to the other areas of our information architecture. Well, thank you so much for joining my session. I hope you found it fun and informative. I hope you'll reach out to me at Joy of SharePoint, Twitter, Instagram, with any questions or feedback you may have.